Hi, everyone. First, I want to apologize for not being able to be there in person. So this travel mess has definitely been a challenge, but I was really grateful that I could still at least spend some time with everyone today and go through our presentation, which is empowering technology through thoughtful healthcare technology management. It was funny, the original topic for my presentation said implementation, and then I changed it to transformation, because what we have experienced, and let me just back up, and I jump around a lot. I will probably talk about my third slide way before I get there, so just bear with me. But I am the Vice President of Services for Futura, and basically what we do is support healthcare technology projects and services in hospitals. So we have a lot of experience with different project-based technology programs and services. And basically what I have seen is it's not necessarily, so many organizations jump to implementation and integration for a variety of reasons. And from our perspective, what I've seen is we have to take more time in really reviewing the fact that in a lot of cases, it's more about an organizational transformation. So we'll get into kind of how I ended up shifting, I think, from the just focus on implementation to a broader discussion on transformation as we go through some of the case studies. So basically what I prepared is what I like to refer to as the 404s, the error messages, the things that we see as we go through projects. Then I have couple different case studies. And then we'll talk a little bit about some solutions or suggestions that I think might be helpful based on everything that we've kind of gone through in our business and what we see in the industry, etc. So let's see if we can just advance. Oh, well, not working. Oh, there we go. Okay. So it's no secret that the industry for many years has gone through a ton of just different change in terms of regulations from different bills and initiatives, value-based care, different bills, all kinds of things that I don't need to educate you on, as you're already all aware, I'm sure. But these statistics are just so staggering. So not only are we faced with so many different new programs, I mean, yes, it seems like yesterday we were all starting to kind of roll out electronic medical records, and now we're trying to figure out how to use AI in our businesses. And it's just crazy at the speed of which things change. So along with that there is a huge shortage right now for talent in terms of IT talent in the workforce. There's also clinical shortages, as everyone's aware. So we're facing just this workforce gap and generational leadership. There's generational gaps within our workforce as well. So you have certain generations exiting, new generations entering. So there's that issue. There's trillions of dollars associated with just losses in terms of skills, technology, projects. There's a lot of struggle. There's a huge struggle with just adopting AI. Whoops, what's happening here? Hold on. We'll get there. I did forewarn you about that. So hang on. Oh my goodness. What's going on here? Okay. So basically, I don't know if I'm just going to move on because that slide is not working, but hopefully you got to see the there's about an $8 trillion market for technology management, a lot of spend happening across the board. So which really leads me to, oh, there we go, talking about implementation versus transformation and the distinction. So Implementation makes things work together. Integration, same type of thing. Okay, you're implementing a system, you need it to work with this other system, you need it to work with all kinds of different technology, hardware, things of that nature. So basically, you're preserving different workflows and processes, you're minimizing disruption, you are emphasizing any type of technical capabilities. Success is usually managed by what? I know everyone has heard this term. Is it live? Did we get it live? Is it on the floor? Things of that nature. So a transformation mindset is really imagining how the work gets done, questioning existing processes and workflows, embracing disruption for improvement, where a lot of times we don't want to disrupt because, let's face it, it is no fun. I can talk so much more about this when we get into the case studies, and I'm trying to pace myself because it's just, there's so many examples of this in terms of we're just prioritizing getting it done versus, okay, is it really going to work? Is it really what we need? Should we slow down? And the metrics we use, like, we really have to reevaluate, what are we measuring? Is that really what makes sense, or is that just what we've done in the past? So that's kind of the difference between just implementing and then a transformational mindset. And one of my favorite authors is James Clear. He writes a lot of just like books on how to improve habits and all those different types of processes. And one of my favorites is, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fail or fall to the level of your systems, which is really something that in our organization I'm really trying to stress, because we can all have goals, but if the way to get to those goals is not clear and defined and makes sense, you're never going to get there. So it's more focused on not necessarily the outcome, but how are we going to get there and what's important to make that work. And to me, that's really kind of what the basis of this presentation is. How do we transform? How do we work to make this work versus just, plopping in our business, it's, 50 new carts and hoping they work and hooking them up to the technology. So, but more importantly, looking at the workflows and the disruption that it's going to cause. So it's really about, like I said, see, I told you I get ahead of myself. So really looking at today's habits in terms of patching over old processes instead of using it to really change our culture and behaviors, and asking, not how do we make this tool work for us, but how do we work differently because of this tool? How is this going to make us more financially productive, more efficient, less downtime, things of that nature. So it really isn't just about adoption, it's about alignment, where the technology is really reinforcing the behaviors that help define the organization that you want to have. Because if you don't work on that, you're still going to have the same problems that you were trying to solve for initially, right? So that's really the goal here. Now, there's a lot of, my background is in organizational change and coaching and high performance, coaching high performing teams, things of that nature. So any presentation I do always has a layer of organizational psychology behind it. So there are a lot of different things that really impede change and transformation. So, and they're actually really valid. So when you look at specifically the healthcare industry, I've worked in every industry you could possibly imagine: food, pharma, technology, hospitals, healthcare. Healthcare to me is the one that always keeps me up at night the most, because you're basically really working to advance healthcare and patient care. So anything you do, there's always this fear of disruption, right? So how can we do this with the least amount of interruption that's going to affect patient care, the safest way, and not become inefficient in the process. A lot of people go into implementations, technology projects thinking, okay, we're doing this because it's going to be less expensive. There's going to be not a lot of training, but what we tend not to go through are the hidden costs that are going to be, that are really, you don't see at first. So for instance, you can implement a great system that has great features and all kinds of things, but if you don't take the time to really learn how to use it and implement it, what was the point? Which we see a lot with a lot of the hardware we will go deploy. It may have great tracking, let's just say fleet management tracking, but the end users don't have time to learn it, or we didn't put that, they didn't think of the plan to really implement it. So you might have saved money, but you're not using the asset in the way that you really wanted to, which was, let's say, how do I manage my fleet and move carts around that are being underutilized with ones that are being overutilized? And how can I tell the department who wants to buy 15 carts that they really don't need them because these are underutilized? Well, if I knew how to use the system, I could help solve that problem. So there's a lot of frustration that we see in the industry in regards to budgets and costs and the true cost of an implementation and the ROI on that asset, things of that nature. So lastly, there's also change resistance. So everyone, mostly everyone, I should say, a lot of people do not like change. We're resistant to it by nature. It's uncomfortable. It gives us anxiety. There's just a lot with change, and there's been books and books and books written on different change methodologies. So it's definitely something that, from an organizational perspective, it is. I mean, when you take, I will refer to nurses' carts a lot because that is the world we live in at the company I work for. And I would just like to say that there's a lot of rules with these types of with these presentations. So I'm trying to really abide by the rules and not do any self-promoting or talk about anything that I shouldn't. So if my stories seem a little cryptic, it's because I'm trying to follow all the presentation rules. Anyway, hopefully I'm not failing at that so far. But in terms of, like, for instance, what we do with carts, it's you're taking someone's main piece of equipment that they use to care for a patient, and you're saying, here's a new one. It's uncomfortable. No matter how many bells and whistles it has, it's disruptive. It slows down sometimes just giving care because it's a new process. So there's just so much change resistance a lot of times in general with whatever you're doing in life. So in terms of just kind of, I wanted to go through some basic, just here's some of the main change management, the missing links, the broken connections that derail initiatives. In terms of really just implementation and what really lies beneath in terms of an organizational culture regarding communication breakdowns, etc. So one of the first things is tunnel vision. So this one is so interesting because this case study will really, this case study I'm going to tell you about was something that actually just happened 2 weeks ago. But really, everyone knows the definition of tunnel vision. I'm not going to bore you, but it's basically when you're so tied to a solution or a routine that you really don't see anything outside of what you're used to. So a lot of times when you're trying to roll out change, people will say, well, no, that's how I've always done it. Or if something's broken, nope, can't be that. We've we've always done it this way. It's always this problem, etc. So a couple weeks ago, I'll tell you a story. I was at one of our hospitals and working with the biomed team. We had some issues with some carts that I'll spare you the details of, but and I noticed in the biomed department, there's a chalkboard where they have different quotes. And I loved this because I have one similar in my office. We refer to it as the Chalkboard Chronicles. So I will write down everything funny or inspirational that happens through the day. It's actually become quite hysterical. I mean, everyone who comes in reads the board and they actually want to get on the board. So sometimes they'll say something funny just to like get on the board in that way. So I thought it was so interesting. They do the same thing in this particular department. So I saw something on the board and it said 0%. So I said, you know, what is, tell me what does that one mean? And they said, well, one day we got a call, huge problem up in the OR. We raced up, patient on the table, and the medical equipment wasn't working. The whatever you use to put someone to sleep wasn't working. And the technician said, well, doctor, I think that you might have intubated the patient down the esophagus and not the airway. And the doctor said, there is 0% chance that that happened. How dare you assume that that is what I did? And next thing you know, the technician says, okay, look, I can't help you. The technology's fine. You have the patient under. There's nothing else we can do. I'm telling you, I think this is the problem. So biomed tech leaves. Hours later, his phone's ringing off the hook. It was the doctor who said, my apologies. You were right. I had intubated the patient down the incorrectly. So basically, that was really what was causing this air quality device. I can't even remember what it was called. So to me, that was like a classic case of tunnel vision where you're just, you know, so adamant that the cause and effect is just what you're used to. And so now this doctor is always referred to as Dr. Zero within the team. So just a little humor there for you. But that was, you know, a good example, actually a really serious example of tunnel vision. And the doctor was really apologetic. And the biomed engineer who had been at the hospital for almost 25 years said, look, I've seen it all, and you are not the first person to do that, which is why I basically said this is, you know, what it could be versus, you know, it being the equipment per se. So that's the tunnel vision. Moving on. Okay, so the metrics mirage. This makes me crazy. I am a huge proponent of data and metrics, but only if the data is relevant. What we tend to measure classically is, all right, let's see, who attended training today? Was everybody attending? Training attended. System logins, projects launched. Did we go through the end of the, I mean, everybody I'm sure in this room has performance reviews, and you have your MBOs and your objectives. So we will look at, okay, did we say what we were going to do? Budget spend, number of meetings held. Instead of looking at really taking the time to say, well, what should we be measuring? So what if they attended the training? Has there been a capability improvement? Have we increased or decreased our problem solving skills and speed and cross-functional collaboration? How much innovation have we developed or implemented in terms of our own infrastructure and those type of things? What value was actually delivered from this process? And decision quality. So we're really trying to, in my opinion, optimize metrics in terms of visibility an activity, while transformation outcomes actually still remain invisible. So all the work everybody does, you just don't really get to see the value sometimes because of all the unknowns and unmeasurable things that you really just we don't take the time to sit back and say, hey, you know what, we really wanted to decrease our number of help desk tickets in the aspect of X, Y, or Z, and we've actually done that. Now that's a pretty clear metric, but you can really dig into that more and say, all right, well, we reduced the tickets by X%, but what we really wanted to do was actually, or what we should have been focusing on was, we never wanted to get this ticket and we wanted to solve this problem so it's not reoccurring. Did we actually achieve that? Or are we still getting ticket? You know, it's like, I could go down the data rabbit hole forever, but so you really, from the perspective of metrics, it's really about how do we not just measure uptime, but the contribution that what you're working on has contributed to different clinical outcomes, care delivery efficiency, etc. So this one's interesting. This is the skills gap that I like to say nobody talks about, but this is a gap, and we referenced it on the first slide. It's even more apparent now in this work environment we work in terms of, with so many people working remotely, there's such a different trend in terms of mentorship, leadership, and really, how do we basically work in an environment where transformation is, there's a lot of unknowns. You have to collaborate with people. There's an ability where so basically the skills you need to really transform an organization are, how do you influence change? How do you really make sure that whatever you're trying to do you have vetted it with every department where it's going to impact. And that is a skill. And it is a skill that takes a lot of time, and with people moving positions so quickly nowadays, it's a challenge. The institutional knowledge that someone used to have in terms of years is different now, because it's okay to leave a position if you've only been there for a year or two. No one looks at my day. I mean, I won't age myself, but if you left a company after a year, people thought you were a loser. Nowadays, they think you're great because you're not going to stay and suffer. You're going to stick it out and move on. So, the world has shifted in that regard. But at the same time, like I said earlier, there's that institutional knowledge that you just don't have, and you don't have, time does equate to experience and understanding an organization. So there are some gaps. Not only are there gaps, but there's also just a general resource issue that we see in terms of, well, who's going to do that? Well, that person left. Okay, well, who's his backup? And I always say, yes, that person left, but they were doing a job, and now no one's doing that job. So how are we addressing that if we're not backfilling them? Because let's face it, there are a lot of just general downsizings, and like I said, they were doing a job and now they're not, and we have to figure that out. So just lack of resources, enough resources, the right resources, and a lot of times I like to say this is not someone's full-time job, the project that they happen to be working on. It's a subset of their daily responsibilities. So not only is it just the number of resources, it's the capacity issue of people having to really just take on different aspects in addition to their day job. A lot of projects are, let's face it, they are, something additional into their routine responsibilities. So a lot of times, and it's not just HTM professionals, it can be any professional, but there is a gap in terms of technology procurement and decisions, and whoever may have to implement and also live with whatever program we're implementing moving forward. And it all ties together. I'm hoping you're seeing a theme here, because it's almost as if if people who need to live with the solution are not the same people who are identifying it, or the people who are really, know the workflows, et cetera, have left the organization, and you're dealing with someone who's been in the job for 30 days. Okay, that's a problem. And it happens. It really does. It sounds so just like, oh yeah, sure, that's probably not the case, but I can assure you it is. It happens, and I'm sure you've seen it, and it creates such problems. I was in a meeting 2 weeks ago where someone actually said, well, they didn't talk to us, so how the heck are we supposed to know what to do with this now? And I literally was like, well, what do you mean they didn't talk to you? You're clinical informatics or whatever department they were. And it was just fascinating to me that these things happen, but they do. So how do we look at some of these 404s to solutions? And really, it's not rocket science. Basically, it's as much cross-functional collaboration as you can possibly have to really combat tunnel vision. Hiring the right people who are able to collaborate and influence change and really draw out of people what they need in some solution is key as well. So I say cross-functional synergy in terms of just who are you selecting to be on a team to implement? Because if they can't influence, if they don't listen to understand versus listening to respond, that's a problem. So really looking at the synergies among a team and being more selective, not just defaulting to, the person who we think we should. Well, maybe not that, maybe they don't have all the competencies, maybe they have a subset of it, but maybe you need someone who is really going to be able to do the things that I previously mentioned in terms of communication. So, because it's important to really dismantle some of the silos interdepartmentally. So moving towards outcome-driven metrics versus the ones we spoke about, where you're really looking at, okay, what is the impact versus what's the number? And how is that really adding organizational value, where so many hospitals are faced with value-based care initiatives and incentives. So really looking at that in terms of, okay, I do that now. Like if we're proposing work for somewhere, I will literally look at the hospital and I'll look at their value-based care objectives, and I try to step back and say, okay, is whatever we're doing, again, I'm really trying to avoid any self-promotion, so I'm not going to say anything like what we're doing, but I'm really trying to look at, does whatever we're trying to solve hit one of these metrics for this hospital? And 9 times out of 10, it usually does, but I try to call it out because I think that it's important that whatever we're trying to do makes sense, and it's going to help improve, at the end of the day, patient care. So in terms of metrics, that's how we look at it. In terms, we never try to put forth a solution without looking at, okay, how is this ROI gonna really translate to helping you move the needle from a broader perspective. Competency building, again, that was basically looking at, okay, if we need these skills to help implement a project, what do we need internally from our team? So really kind of from a hiring practice, from a training perspective, looking at like, okay, what does our team need? What are the competencies of a person who's going to lead a project? Okay, they have to influence, they have to be detail oriented, they have to have organizational understanding, the ability to influence from the top to the bottom, engaging with key stakeholders, etc. So when I say competency building, that's really kind of what I'm referring to there. All right. Sorry, this delay is killing me with these slides. Okay, so the playbook. I tend to really like sports. I don't know a lot about half of them that I say I like, but I'm always fascinated from the coaching perspective. So you'll see there's a lot of sports analogies throughout this presentation. So couple things to keep in mind before we go into the case stories, because what I want to do is talk about the case studies and then be able to draw back to some of the things that we have gone through already. So start with the why, not the what. So a lot of times people will start with the product. Start with the purpose, because that's really what the driver, because if people understand the why, the adoption and the user, the end user will adopt, and that's really what we want. We don't want resistance, we don't want confusion, things of that nature. So people before process. Always try to design and implement with the people who use this, who use the system. Have those early conversations, and progress over perfection. You know, there's so many. I kind of live by the philosophy of disruption, and it drives my team crazy, but we will talk about something ad nauseum that's not working, and then one day I will do something a little drastic and I'll make a change. I'll talk to the person who it's going to impact primarily, and I'll say, look, the time has come. I can't take it anymore. You need to, we're doing this now. So how do you feel about it? Oh, fine. I guess I can handle it. Okay, great. We're doing it. And then the whole, you would think the world, like people just lose their minds. But I always say, if I didn't create the disruption, it would not force you. You would never work together. You would never overcome the friction. You would never try to work out a solution. But by causing the disruption, I have essentially forced you to figure it out and work through it. Because to the last thing here, progress over perfection. You cannot wait for perfection. There is never going to be the right time for anything. There is always going to be some sort of issue, another project. There's not going to be money. So, you know, just sometimes you just have to move forward and not have the perfect plan. You have to have some sort of plan, but it doesn't have to always be perfect. So progress over perfection. Okay, now, I know you all are sitting in Dallas. I'm in Philadelphia. This is a shot of a Super Bowl. You might not recognize it, just saying, but these are my Eagles, and there is a play referred to as the tush push. And I didn't really put any thought into this until I was reading something recently, and it was a little fascinating to me, and I thought I would apply it to this presentation. It's truly one of the most unstoppable plays in football, and there's actually been some physicists who have said like the earth literally moves or something. That's how impactful this one play is. And basically the the play is really centralized around every player knows their role, every player executes precisely, and there is literally no room for any hesitation. They basically ground themselves, and the ground force is so impactful, it makes whatever we're trying to achieve at the time, gaining yardage, whatever it is, possible. So the tush push to me is a really good kind of metaphor for healthcare technology implementations. Really, you have to have the same approach. Individual brilliance or effort means nothing without coordination. Any project will fail if there is not a unified team working in the same direction. And it is nothing earth-shattering. I know, okay, great, Moira, you're telling us to work like a team, but it is really, really still important. And if we don't coordinate and if we don't communicate, and believe me, I am a big failure at this a lot of times, because I will do things like at the speed of lightning, and my team will come back and say, well, did you do this? And I have to remind myself of these things. So as someone who's studied all these different organizational concepts, I still have to check myself and say, okay, you didn't even think about this. You did this too quickly. You didn't think about the impact. You didn't communicate, blah, blah, blah. So it's really important, and you just can't take it for granted. So a couple case studies. This was a case study from this particular one is Christiana Care, and this is a case study that we actually put together. So basically, they had I can't remember, about 700 carts, medical carts, that they wanted to replace with new carts. So a lot of times a hospital will just buy any type of cart. They'll figure it out, they'll buy it, they'll put it on the floor. What Christiana did was they actually brought in a cart fair with, I don't know, let's say 10 vendors. It was probably around 10. And they brought in a ton of nurses, and they actually let the nurses survey the carts and the functionality, and then they tallied the results and they picked the right cart, etc. So they were really vendor agnostic from their evaluation of the carts in general. Then what they decided was, okay, we found the cart, everybody agrees on it, great. And then they put together a team from everyone from the department finance director of whatever department it was, I can't remember. So you had finance input, you had people in shipping and receiving involved. So you're looking at the highest level to the lowest organization, different people involved. So from logistics management, from taking how many trucks could be brought into, you know, the parking lot that day. What they decided was, this sounds crazy, but this is actually like real life. Because they didn't want the disruption of trash and unpacking, we took that to our warehouse. We did all that. And then we brought it, because that was a big thing. How are we going to unpack 800 carts in a series of trips with minimal disruption? So, you know, that's another aspect of, okay, we really thought through the planning. They thought through the planning, I should say. That we actually implemented technical rounding. Once we put the carts on the floor, remember in the beginning of this presentation when I was referencing nurses and how valuable these carts are to them? So imagine taking away a cart that someone has used for years, potentially, and giving them this brand new piece of equipment that you're now responsible for rolling around to different departments. I think the statistics are one nurse sees, depending on the floor in the unit, could be 7 to 8 patients an hour with a cart. That may involve med pass, things of those natures. You disrupt the cart, you don't know the patient's history, you don't know, because a lot of them have PCs on them, so you can't really see what's happening. So we had technical rounding where technicians would go around the floor, they would check on the carts, etc. And then Christiana did really good training all around the clock. They actually went, and they thought about the different shifts and the different shift differential times, things of that nature. So looking back, when we had to present the project to their executive team, the one thing that we shared was this was a transformation. It was an organizational disruption of almost 1,000 carts that they really handled it well because of all the things and the upfront management and all those little nuances we talked about, from just picking the cart, letting people be involved in that process, really helped user adoption. So they had the impact was very little downtime in terms of just rolling out the new carts. They went live, they were successful. The operational uptime, there was very little issues with that in terms of, making everything was working well. So that was, a good example of where when you look back on some of the things we talked about, those key solutions on combating the 404s, they ticked a lot of boxes when this project was rolled out. So another project we weren't involved in this, but I think this is a really good example of some of the things we've talked about. But again, this is another fleet management project with this was Baptist Health and Ergotron. So Baptist was having a lot of challenges in regards to not enough workstations serving their bed capacity. Nurses were complaining regarding battery life, and there were so many reports going to IT that the batteries were only lasting 2 hours, like very exaggerated, but with no data supporting it. Just this card only charges for 2 hours. So it was a problem. It was creating a lot of issues. So what they did was they found a solution with a cart that had fleet management software on the cart, Ergotron cart Rhythm software, and they initiated a pilot. They deployed Rhythm onto their workstations. And basically what Rhythm does is it'll show you how many carts you have, where they are, what their battery usage is, how much battery is left, utilization in terms of how many people have been using this cart. Is it used 1 hour a day or is it used 20 hours a day? So really it was a platform to discover data that they needed in terms of help desk tickets, etc. And what they found was they were able to address a lot of the anecdotal references regarding problems, battery charges, and they could bring up data now that said, okay, listen, your battery is lasting way more than 2 hours. The problem is that you haven't charged it since 12 p.m. based on the data. You need to charge your cart in, at certain intervals. So it sounds like a stupid thing, but again, it's not, because you're talking about patient care and output and things of that nature. So if the equipment doesn't work, it affects everything. So this is an example where they looked at, what are we trying to solve for? What are the issues? It's not just the cart, it's operational inefficiencies on the floor. What cart are we going to buy and what software does it have that are going to address these or I should say, help us uncover what is actually going on here. It's not that they, didn't know what the problems were necessarily, but they needed to be able to see what was causing the organizational issues. So this software gave them insights to combat some of the anecdotal, oh, the cart's broke, the cart doesn't work, the cart doesn't charge, the battery's down, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, now we can show you that the cart's probably not working because you've had it running for 20 hours and you have another one sitting in the closet that you could pull out of the closet and use that one. So, that was a really, to me, a good example of just, identifying a solution based on a lot of different feedback and a lot of different issues. All right, so this one is, what's happening here? Hold on. Where are we at here? I think this is the last case study. Yes. So lockstep was this, sorry guys, I don't know what is happening here. Hang on. We're getting there. Okay. So Lockstep Technology Group worked with LCM Health in regards to their patient transfer center. And basically, in summary, they went through the process of really working with all the different aspects in the department, looking at all of the delayed patient transfers that impacted bed availability, patient care timelines, things of that nature, and were able to implement a transfer center that changed a lot of the ways in which LCMC was operating. And basically, they went from drowning in paper to a workflow using a Cisco WebEx process integrated with Epic, way above my skill set. I don't even understand how this type of stuff works. But anyway, what happened was, because they really looked at the workflow and looked at why they were drowning in paper, why they were having so many phone calls, they were able to really implement a process and a technology that increased transfers by 25%. And it was really, again, a culture shift towards collaboration and transformation. And this was really a great example of how this project was so complicated, apparently, that if they hadn't involved every person from a workflow perspective, they would not have achieved what they wanted. So this really was a lesson in transformation when teams align on purpose, not just the tools. So they really dug into what were the issues impacting the transfer center and how were they going to solve those issues by whatever solution they were implementing. I'm trying to be patient. Here we go. Okay, there it is. So as I start to wrap up, I think moving forward, whenever we're working on implementations or organizational transformations or any types of projects, patience is really key. And timelines really need to take that into account. So many times we pick a date, but it's not the reality of what the organizational change is going to encompass. Yes, You may get that go live, it may be on, maybe working technically, but there has to be a shift of not just measuring things in quarters or months or fiscal operational budgets, but in terms of years. Because you have to wait for some of that momentum to work and let time build some credibility for the project and the outcomes. And the users gain confidence in what they're using. So I just think that's important to keep in mind, is that it's a lot of times, depending on the project or the implementation, we have to shift our mindset. It's years sometimes, and that's a big shift. And I get it, because I don't have patience. I need to find some, but I just don't have it. So it's something I have to work on as well. So basically, there is a couple things I wanted to just wrap up with in terms of some things to keep in mind. So really do an assessment of organizational readiness. It's okay to push back. I think somewhere along the way, sometimes we forget that it's okay to have a voice and to speak up and say, I don't think we're ready for this right now, because you just hired a new VP and they don't really know the way to the bathroom yet. So maybe we should pause this project and wait till they're a little more acclimated. It's okay to say those things. And make sure that everyone's aligned and set people up for success. And make sure that there's capacity levels from resources, and those resources are available and it makes sense and they're the right resources. Strategic sequencing is also something that gets lost in terms of prioritizing initiatives in a sequence that makes sense from an overall perspective. And whatever you're implementing isn't dependent on something else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because believe it or not, that happens. So it's really important to also have a voice when it comes to these certain projects and initiatives. Infrastructure investment is something that also has to be considered. So the systems, the learning platforms, what does that really look like from an integration perspective? Because if that isn't thought through, there will not be sustainable change and improvement. So really that has to be thought through as much as possible. And how are we going to really make whatever we're doing successful from a long-term impact? So feedback loops. Again, that's something that I didn't really address earlier, but it is important, because sometimes there aren't processes set up for anticipated problems that if they were, we would be able to course correct quicker. So really looking at, okay, we implemented, here's how you use it. If you have a problem, throw a ticket in, but there could potentially be more time put into what does this really look like from a feedback perspective. Every piece of feedback, by the way, doesn't have to be a problem. It could be a good thing. So being open to good and bad feedback, what's working, what's not, was this good, should we have done this, all is important. And I don't think enough time is spent on collectively reviewing and taking the time to collect just general feedback. So last thing is persistent commitment. And this can just get so lost in an industry that is just continually mired with challenges and innovation and things of that nature. So trying to maintain the transformation focus through, for example, any type of leadership transition, market disruptions, and setbacks is really, really hard. It can be just so challenging, but it's really key to be persistent with whatever you were trying to implement and keep it alive and sustainable no matter what is happening. And that's hard, but as leaders, it always has to be in the forefront of your mind, or you will just lose people along the way. You'll lose people along the way through implementation, but then you'll also lose people through after things have been said and done. And you don't really want to do that. You want to keep the momentum going, because as we remember, if you look at this top sentence here, we have to start thinking of measurement in years for certain projects, not just quarters. So it's important to keep in mind the commitment, what you signed up for, what you were trying to achieve. Bring people back to the initial reason for whatever you've done, and keep reminding them of what your intention was. So essentially addressing the 404s that we talked about really demand a fundamental shift in how you approach change, and viewing transformation not just as a project with defined endpoints and a beginning, but as an ongoing organizational process that has to be continually developed, reviewed, maintained, etc. And the hope is that an organization will thrive in decades. And those are the ones that won't, they're the ones who will thrive aren't necessarily the ones who executed these perfect plans. I mean, I gave you a lot of examples of case studies where, the execution of the project went really well, but, it's the real success ones. The successful ones are the ones that have built the internal capability to transform continuously and learn from their failures, and are able to look back and say, okay, we bought this cart with this software and we haven't even touched the software. So now what do? Do we ignore it and do we just not use it? Or do we get a team together and do we say, hey, we have this software now. You've lived with this cart for 7 months. There's this other capability. We're going to use it because we signed up for it, we wanted it, and now we're going to figure it out. It may be painful, and it may be annoying, and we don't know who's going to do it, and it's really complicated, but we're going to gut it out and we're going to figure it out. So those conversations are the ones when I say, in terms of like, you got to keep committed. That's an example. Stay committed, stay the course, and continue down that path that you originally wanted. So I'm almost done, I promise. I think there's one more slide. So in summary, this presentation was really kind of a blueprint for trying to not just think about implementation, but organizational transformation. And I've been in this role for almost 4 years now. And when I started healthcare, I only knew about doctors and nurses and patients. And what I have learned about what healthcare technology professionals do is unbelievable to me. And I had no idea. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you are basically the bridge between technology and efficient patient care. And you really just don't install systems. You have to cultivate environments where technology is integrated, but also it's intuitively used and it's constantly evolving to meet the needs of healthcare. And you are an asset steward in my mind. And I think that everything ties back to patient care, even though it may not feel that way, it does. And, just knowing that everything from from a hospital life cycle, from a patient entering, is really you touch it in some capacity. So continue just to audit. I think we need to continue to audit these roles in terms of involvement in decisions, procurement, integration, identify gaps where you can add value differently or you need to add value. I think it's really cool how I see this interaction between clinical departments and healthcare technology professionals, and learning all their challenges only will help you make really good informed decisions about just how technology can impact those aspects. And then really quantifying the business impact is really, really important. I like to say, you know, we manage a lot of carts and a lot of service, but preventative maintenance and repairs and upgrades and systems really do improve total cost of care. Those types of things are important. Those are the types of things that the financial stewards of an organization want to know. So the more that you can document how any type of technology has really had a business impact from those perspectives is really helpful and important.